I had to underclock my CPU in order to finish this video. The game has no voice acting whatsoever. It should come as no surprise that Aquaman Battle for Atlantis may just be the worst game I've ever played. After finishing the last episode of Does It Hold Up, I started looking for games with really low scores on Metacritic. It's a personal goal of mine to find a game so terrible that everybody needs to play it, and coming off the back of 2 critically acclaimed titles seems like the perfect time to begin my search. Fun surprise for you, not only is this the lowest reviewed superhero game ever released, it's also the lowest reviewed action-adventure game. I am so excited to share this with you, and without any further ado, we need to talk about Aquaman, Battle for Atlantis, and the story goes something like this. So, really, there's not a lot to talk about. Atlantis gets invaded, you stop the guy who did it, there's a misunderstanding which leads to Atlantis getting invaded, you stop the guy who did it, you find out who's behind the whole thing, and then you stop him. I'm being so serious. That's the entire plot. You've missed literally nothing. Now let's talk about the game. The first red flag comes from the menus. Not only do they look really bad, but at least on the GameCube version, it only lets you navigate using the D-pad. I think in most cases this isn't a huge deal, but given that the menus are also disgusting, it feels like there was just no thought put into it. Speaking of putting no thought into things, superhero video games have the rare opportunity to replace any and all cutscenes with comic books. These first few panels make it a little tricky to tell, but instead of having art made for these segments, they just chose to use the in-game models. And it looks terrible. To make this even worse, the text bubbles are often incorrectly sized and lack any sort of outline or drop shadow. This took me like 2 minutes. I did a really bad job, and even though I used Comic Sans, I still think it looks better. Oh yeah, this isn't voice acted, by the way. The audio you've been hearing in the background was taken straight from the recording. It's kinda crazy to think that Ultimate Spider-Man, a game which fully embraces the comic book style cutscenes insanely well, came out just 2 years after this steaming pile of dookie. I don't really understand how it's possible, but from here the game only continues to get worse. The only place that you could find the controls is in the menus when you first launch the game, which is insanely easy to overlook.
I don't know how to play.
I think it goes without saying that showing the player how to play the game should be common practice, especially if your controls aren't intuitive. Before we get any further, I'd like to point out that this arrow is supposed to be inside of the circle for the compass, and I'm assuming that the only reason it's not is because I forced the game to launch at 1920 by 1080. Either way, I think it fits in extremely well, almost as well as you'd fit in as a subscriber of this channel. That's probably the best segue that you'll ever get from me. Many people who've reviewed this game like to point out how awful the swimming feels to control, but if I'm being honest, I don't think it's as bad as it's usually painted to be. While you're moving, it feels very similar to flying a plane in most games. The only issues that I had with the movement were from being stationary. The joystick rotates Aquaman in whatever direction you move it in, so if you're swimming still, I guess, it feels very strange. It's a silly design, but I got used to it fairly quickly, so I can't really complain. The first mission has us swim around and rescue the citizens of Atlantis from bad guys. Question for you. Before we encounter our first fight of the game, what do you think the combat will be like? If you answered Tekken, but boring and also underwater, you'd be correct. Every single fight in this game is like this. It doesn't matter how many people you're fighting, it doesn't matter where you are. As you can imagine, doing this for every enemy gets obnoxious very quickly. There is a combo system in this Aquaman video game, and that's a sentence that I never thought I'd say. The timing for performing a combo changes between each one, and I swear to you, sometimes they just don't work. If I had to guesstimate, 70% of this game is spent in the purgatory that is these fight sequences. On top of being fairly beefy on the normal difficulty, enemies will actually block your attacks and grab you. If only there was a way to one-shot enemies with a limited use ability where I call on a fish to help me. The goofiest part about Aquaman Battle for Atlantis is its need to constantly remind you that you're underwater, as if you'd ever forget. You've probably noticed these weird reflections by now, and I'm sorry if you didn't. It looks awful and can even be nauseating at times. This effect very rarely goes away. We'll discuss the situations where it does shortly. In case you forgot, this is just the first level, and I was convinced by this point that the game was either never released or came bundled with a box of cereal. But no, this was a fully produced game that cost $20 real-life dollars. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, there can't be that many levels then, right? And I looked it up and it's 21. There are 21 levels in this game. The second level is essentially just the first level, except this time your goal is to defeat a set amount of enemies rather than rescue a set amount of civilians. You have to beat all of the bad guys in both levels anyways, so really, they might as well be the same. As I'm getting ready for this repetitive style to be the next 6 hours of my life, suddenly, boom! Aquaman's in a submarine! My favorite part about these levels is that the controls change. I mean, obviously, right? You're in a submarine now. It's going to be different. Tell me why I have to press right trigger to swim forward as Aquaman, but if I want to move the submarine, it's the left trigger? You won't believe this. You have the option to switch between third and first person views. Just a little side note, when you go into first person view, there is a radar which is absent otherwise. I just feel like this is a silly choice. I don't really understand why the radar can't be in the third-person view.
While you're in the submarine, you can lock onto enemies, making it easier to shoot them down. Please remember this. These sections are okay. I think they're more fun than the typical levels, but really they aren't that great either. For the fourth mission, you're put on a timer to defuse 5 bombs which have been planted throughout Atlantis. This is surprisingly the only level which doesn't group together with the others, and it's still not good.
It's interesting to me that the explosives, which were supposed to be a threat to these buildings, only do a minuscule amount of damage to the enemies. Furthermore, defusing the bombs is just picking them up, and you can even throw them at the buildings that you were supposed to keep safe. The camera also bugged out on me several times during this mission, which was just foreshadowing for the rest of my experience. Mission 5 is where I experienced my first of many crashes, and when I say many, I mean many. Both official releases of this game have issues with crashing, but when you emulate it, you might run into the very rare issue where your computer is too powerful to run the game. I had to underclock my CPU, actively making my computer weaker in order to finish this video. I have never experienced this issue before. In the 6th level, bad guys attack the palace and you have to stop them before they destroy it. And with 15 levels remaining, we have covered every single type of level in this game. I am being 100% serious. At some point around here, the most pathetic part of this game finally hit me. I've watched several other videos about Aquaman Battle for Atlantis, and it seems like nobody else has pointed this out, but the game has no voice acting whatsoever. At first that sounds stupid, like yeah, obviously the comic book cutscenes are completely silent. That's not what I'm talking about though. I mean the enemies, the bosses, and even Aquaman make zero sound, not even a grunt. The only noise you get is from impacts and the water moving as you punch and kick. It's fitting that a game that seems to be as low effort as this one would be like this, but even bad work would have made it better. In order to prove that, my girlfriend and I decided to dub over 2 scenes for you, and to further drive home our point, she is voicing Aquaman. My liege, something is coming.
Calm yourself, Volko. What are you talking about?
A premonition, sire. Danger, destruction, Atlantis in ruins.
I am Aquaman.
Yeah, fuck you, Aquaman. Got yourself a little fish wife with your little fish son that I killed because I'm a bad guy in your story. Yeah, little guppy ass looking bitch. Bet you got scales on your butt cheeks, little fish boy.
I am Aquaman.
So yeah, personally, I think that we knocked it out of the park. Warner Brothers, if you need anybody to do some voice work for you, we'd be happy to. There's only a handful of things that I'd like to talk about before we get into my personal score and discuss whether or not the game holds up to its reputation. Firstly, Aquaman ignores his wife Mira more than once throughout this game. He's kind of a douche. Second, there's a scene where he threatens Black Manta with a shark, but after Black Manta says that he can handle a shark, he instead threatens him with 11 sharks. Remember earlier when I said the weird water reflections go away at some points? It's only when you're inside. The reason I find this interesting is because during the comic strips where characters are indoors, they're either walking around or sitting as if there is no water. I'm not gonna pretend to be an Aquaman expert, but at least in the media that I've seen, Atlantis is typically dry indoors. Based on the lack of typical visual effects, I think it's safe to say that making a good game was either considered or attempted at one point, but this feature didn't make it to the final release. It's worth mentioning that at one point, the game thought I was constantly holding left. I'm not really sure how this happened. I'm assuming that I did something while the level was loading. I tried unplugging my controller and putting it back in, but that didn't fix the dead zone issue. I even launched Melee to make sure my controller wasn't the problem, and sure enough, nothing was wrong. All it took to fix this was resetting, but it was still a really weird issue. During this submarine level, you have to use special torpedoes to break off the shackles on the Leviathan. The torpedoes have limited ammo, and the only way you can get more is by destroying enemy ships and hoping they drop a blue recharge pack. The problem with this level is that for whatever reason, the aforementioned lock-on feature from previous submarine levels is non-existent. You're pretty much stuck slowly moving around and shooting in hopes that you'll randomly hit an enemy ship. The main villain of this game is Ocean Master, and the amount of damage that he does to you on normal difficulty is honestly insane. I'm sure I would have gotten through this game a lot easier if I just button mashed, but I genuinely tried to use the combos and give the whole combat system a chance, so this fight took a few attempts. I'd like to circle back to the beginning. When you start a new game, you have the option of selecting your character and a difficulty. You do not understand the pure fear that coursed through my body when I realized that there might be additional levels that come from playing a new unlockable character. Thankfully, character just means pick a skin.
I wanted to see how awful it looks, so I loaded into a new game with the classic Aquaman skin. Since I wanted to see everything as quickly as possible, I chose easy for the difficulty. Surprisingly, I actually enjoyed the look of the classic Aquaman skin more than I did the regular skin, but that's besides the point, because as I began to fight my first enemy, it became abundantly clear that this was the way the game was meant to be played, and I don't think it'd be much of a stretch to assume that it was only playtested on the easy difficulty. Of the 21 levels, the only ones that are distinctly unique are the 4 submissions and the 1 mission at the beginning of the game with the bombs.
The remaining 16 levels just make you defeat all the enemies within an area. 2 of these levels have you defend a location, but really you have to defeat all the enemies to do this, so it's the same thing. Now it's time for my personal review and score of the game. It should come as no surprise that Aquaman Battle for Atlantis may just be the worst game I've ever played. I was hoping that it would feel similar to watching Troll 2. Meaning that I knew it was going to be awful, but I was hoping that I would have fun looking at how ridiculous it is. Unfortunately, this game is genuinely so bad that you eventually get tired of laughing at it because you want nothing more than to be done with the game. When you're in my position where you're forced to finish it if you want to make a YouTube video, the constant crashes and bugs do not make it easier. My score for Aquaman Battle for Atlantis is a 1 out of 10, and I want to be very clear. If it wasn't for this stupid scene with the sharks and the submarine, it would be a 0. But my personal score isn't really the point of this series, because as many of you know, sometimes the bad experiences are worth experiencing, and sometimes the good ones aren't worth all the trouble. So, does Aquaman Battle for Atlantis hold up to its title of being the worst action-adventure and superhero game? Yes. The answer is undoubtedly yes. But should you play it even just to laugh at the game? No. Not in a million years. Do yourself a favor and stay as far away from this game as you possibly can. As always, thank you for watching, and if you have any suggestions for bad games or even good ones that you'd like to see an episode on, please let me know in the comments down below. I've been adding them to a spreadsheet, and I'd love to eventually cover all the games that you guys want to see. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like down below and subscribe if you haven't already. We are 3/4 of the way to 1,000 subscribers, which is something that I really thought would never happen. All of you have been so supportive and appreciative of the work that I put in for these, and I really couldn't thank you enough. Maybe someday I'll share with you the full story on how we got here. That's all from me, and have a fantastic rest of your day.